Do you know if there are efforts underway through AXA or CSBA to work with CDE and the governor's folks and all the folks who oversee the LCAP process to try to refine it and improve it to make it more meaningful?
Many efforts are underway. There's an LCFF collaborative working group that I'm a part of, and it's board presidents and superintendents through CSBA. That's one example, and I think my colleagues could talk about other examples of how we're doing that. It's really important that the document actually represents the heart of what's happening in the districts.
And also not just be a mechanism for wheel spinning.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspectives too.
Well, I think that it's helped in the sense that, we used to have these categoricals, and oftentimes it created a culture in school districts where here's how much you get for EL students, and you're going to do this with that limited funding, and then it becomes whoever's working with EL students, that's their piece of the pie, if you will. Versus now that it's all in, I keep going back to the, bucket, right? Now that it's all back in one bucket, it is now we're having at those discussions looking at all of our kids. These are all of our kids. They're not just somebody else's because you're paid out of Title III monies or what have you. And so I think that's a good shift because, yes, the conversations are challenging. We're talking about culture, and it is a shift. Also, I think
Did you need the state to tell you to do this?
I think I didn't need the state to tell me to do this, but I think it helps drive the conversation. And the reason for that is because we're talking about core beliefs, individual core beliefs. And the demographics, that have changed over the years in backyards of many folks, it's been a difficult change for some. And so to have those conversations in light of here's a tool now, the LCAP is moving you forward to those conversations, I think has helped quite a bit. Where has maybe hindered is we don't want to see it to become another bureaucratic layer and jumping through the hoops, going back to that compliance issue. But I also know that right now, especially with the supplemental and concentration funds, there's a misnomer out there that we could use that for salary increases. And it's having us have to tackle that issue as well. We've got districts across the state that are at impasse because we see that as local controlled funding, meaning that means we should be able to say what we're going to do with this money. So that can be misconstrued as, don't forget who those monies are for. And so a help and a hindrance, I think they go hand in hand sometimes, particularly when we're going down a path we haven't gone down before.
If I just can add, Senator Allen, that you ask a fair question. And I think if you look at it from this perspective, because yes, indeed, it's happening in other states, and it's happening across the globe for that matter, and the students are achieving even in the midst of daunting obstacles. But if you look at it from this perspective in terms of a framework, if you look at root cause analysis and theory of action, we have a bunch of kids in this state who are learning the language. They're learning English. Many of them at the poverty level. Their parents have no high school diplomas in many cases. And those students, in addition to other students who are not achieving at higher levels, and perhaps they don't have the same challenges, and you compare us to other states, and then you compare us to other countries, and you recognize that there's a problem. And it's been that way for decades. So to create a framework, a theoretical framework that starts with really lasering in on those students who need the most help, not neglecting those who are at the middle or at the top, but really looking at how can we resource those kids at the bottom and mandate it so that we're forced to do it. There can be no equivocation. I think that's the liberating force. Now, if you had said, could you do that without those kinds of conditions, I would say it could be done. The question is, will you get the harmony, the unanimity across the state and get the top executive of this state, the governor, investing himself, the legislature, yourselves? I don't know. I don't think we could have done that. Right. I think we needed this.
Yeah, all I'll say is No Child Left Behind sought to solve the problem of the achievement gap back in 2001, laid out a lot of mandates. We still have the problem. So I guess what's going to constantly be our struggle, both as policymakers and on all levels, is how do we craft this in a way that will actually be meaningful, not just another governmental mandate to, the children will learn that actually is meaningful and impactful. We've just gone through this so many times as a as a set of policymakers in the education world, and I'm encouraged to hear your stories from the ground. You seem to be very excited about this, and it seems to be meaningful and helpful. But I'm going to be constantly struggling with ways to make sure it is, and it's not just another set of reports that takes your staff's time away from its work overseeing the schools and doing all the work they need to do, given how overburdened they already are, both in terms of lack of funding and mandates and everything else that they have.
Thank you.
Senator Allen, thank you for the probing questions and insightful comments. I do know Superintendent Martin and I both have to be in San Diego for meetings this afternoon, and Southwest tells us if we don't get going, we're not going to make it. So Senator Allen is going to take the chair for the last two panels on facilities and Prop 39. I will be reviewing the videotape, so I'll hear all the comments of both of the panelists and of those making public comment. I'll also review any written documents, so I apologize for having to leave at this point, at least as soon as he gets back. But I will be, by next week at this time, I'll have seen everything that's gone on. So in advance, let me thank members of the public who are going to comment. And right now, let me thank this panel and excuse you. And ask now to come up on item number 3, school facilities, Maritza Urquiza from the Department of Finance, Hamil Nakvi from the Legislative Analyst's Office, and Monique Ramos again from the Department of Education. And we'll begin with the Department of Finance.
Good morning, Maritza Urquiza, Department of Finance. As presented in the informational hearing on school facilities, the administration has noted significant shortcomings and concerns with the current school facilities program, including its complexity, its reliance on state debt issuance, and a first-come, first-served funding structure that disadvantages small school districts. The current system also fails to take into account the local capacity in many parts of the state to finance school facilities or absorb a greater portion of facility cost. In order to address these concerns, the governor's budget presents guiding principles to shape a new program. The governor's budget recommends that a new program move away from state debt issuance and target state funding to low-wealth districts. Given that state funding would be targeted to the districts with the greatest need, the governor's budget also recommends exploring a number of tools and local flexibilities to help school districts finance school facilities at the local level. The guiding principles and recommendations are an attempt to continue the dialogue about addressing the shortcomings of the current system. To further assist charter schools with their facility needs, the governor's budget also includes an increase of $50 million Prop 98 General Fund for the Charter School Facility Grant Program. The additional funding would support program expansion after lowering the free or reduced price meal requirement to 55%. Finally, the governor's budget proposes $273.4 million in one-time Prop 98 General Fund for the Emergency Repair Program, retiring the state's obligation under the Williams Settlement. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Nakvi from LAO.
Thank you, Jamil Nakvi, LAO. We just want to call your attention to the earlier proposal that we've made. It's kind of an alternate proposal to the governor's, proposing some alternate design elements for a future school facilities program. Basically, our proposal calls for an annual state grant that would continue the strong partnership between the state and local school districts. And this grant would be adjusted for local resources to account for disparities in local wealth. As for the particular proposals that have been brought forth by the governor, we would encourage the subcommittee and the legislature to consider those proposals in light of the general school facilities program, and not really to consider these on an individual basis, but to consider how these fit into a future school facilities program. That being said, I think there are some trade-offs that are associated with each of these proposals. Certainly increasing local debt ceilings and the Prop 39 tax issuance limits could provide some additional capacity for local school districts. On the other hand, this, of course, could lead to higher local tax rates. It could lead to lower approval rates. We know that under the Proposition 39 limits, we've seen approval rates at the local level of about 80%. So we could see some declines in this kind of approval rate if we allow those limits to be increased. We also know that there are some alternatives even under those existing caps. For example, the State Board of Education has the authority to grant waivers to school districts for those overall indebtedness caps. And we know that that frequently takes place subject to certain limitations and conditions. Furthermore, we know that under the Proposition 39 tax issuance limits, districts can and we believe sometimes do ask for additional authority to access those bonds that have already been approved. On the governor's proposal to institute a uniform developer fee, again, based on the way that we've kind of implemented our current statute, districts are currently only allowed to levy up to 50% of a project's cost. That's level 2 developer fees. This would be an increase. Around 75% of project costs could be recovered. Certainly this would allow districts to access more revenue, and under what we believe is a somewhat more restricted role for the state proposed by the governor, this could create the need for additional local revenue, and this could be one of those sources. On the other hand, as the subcommittee I'm sure is aware, this could increase costs for homeowners and have some impacts potentially on local housing markets and on housing affordability. And finally, allowing the flexibility around the use of the restricted maintenance funds. We think there are some mechanisms right now, for example, the good repair standard, that encourages local school districts to take into account their maintenance needs on an annual basis, and they're certainly required to address this in their local control accountability plans. Potentially, under the governor's proposal, some districts could maintain their facilities more efficiently, perhaps only using 1 to 2% on maintenance and using the remainder for other facilities needs. On the other hand, there's a concern that districts may not invest appropriately in maintaining their facilities, particularly projects that have received significant investments from the state. So we would just encourage the legislature to kind of take into account all of these trade-offs when looking at these proposals and consider them in the light of the larger school facilities program. I just want to speak separately to the charter school facility grant program, and my colleague who covers charter schools is here to answer more detailed questions. But similar to the governor's other proposals, we would recommend that the legislature consider this proposal in light of the broader school facilities program. Additionally, we do feel that expanding this program is analogous to the idea that we have proposed as funding school facilities on an annual grant and providing significant flexibility to school districts to meet their facility needs. Expanding this program could be one step in that direction for charter schools. We've run an analysis that indicates that the governor's proposed expansion of $50 million for this program could actually fund a majority of charter schools for their rent and lease expenses, not just the charter schools meeting the 55% eligibility requirement for free and reduced price lunches. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Let's continue with the panel, and then we'll talk as a full panel. So.
Oops, excuse me. Monique Ramos on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. So as I've mentioned before, the superintendent was very involved in the development of the current school facilities program back in the late 90s, and feels that this program has been extremely successful. We have improved classrooms that were in disrepair. We have resolved several overcrowding problems throughout the state. We have built joint use facilities and improved career technical education facilities. But all of this has been able to be done with a state and local partnership. And he thinks that that partnership is absolutely necessary in our next program. I think that in regards to the governor's budget proposal, he is concerned that there is not enough of a state-local match. He very much would agree that the current program has become overburdensome for schools and thinks it's important to take a look at it and simplify it as much as possible, but that this program should be resolved comprehensively, not piecemeal. And finally, the superintendent also does support, I just want to mention, the governor's proposal to pay down the final payment for the emergency repair loan program. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me start with you then. We were talking about all these facilities needs, and you'd mentioned the fact that I totally understand not wanting to see Prop 98 monies going toward new facilities, et cetera. What does the superintendent have a kind of a counter proposal for comprehensive improvements to our school facilities?
So the superintendent doesn't have a comprehensive proposal at this very moment. He's done substantial work on it in his first year as superintendent. He had a report, Schools of the Future, that explored some of these things, and we could come back to the senator, with some proposals and recommendations. I think that he believes the bonding program has worked. It's fundamentally worked for this purpose, and is happy to kind of reevaluate and look at other options on the table. Not that we're being closed-minded, but doesn't necessarily see that we need to walk away from something that has worked so successfully.
Has he taken a position on the proposed statewide school facilities bond for 2016?
He has not on the 2016. I think he thinks that we need to have a comprehensive conversation and look at a lot of things, and we can follow up with your office specifically on those things.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. I mean, in getting to Department of Finance, the governor has obviously said he doesn't support a general obligation bond, but I guess I'm having a hard time understanding, where the extra money that we all know needs to come through the system should come from. I guess you're sort of talking about these increasing local bonds. Is that sort of the essential plan? I mean, what's the? Could you break it down in layman's terms? What the governor says is the solution to our kind of future facilities challenges?
Right, but part of the solution is to increase the tools and local flexibilities for school districts to, for instance, issue debt to finance facilities at the local level or absorb a greater portion of those costs. The governor's budget also advocates a continued state role in helping school districts finance school facilities, but targeting funding to only those districts that have the lowest assessed value.
Where would that money come from?
This budget doesn't specify a specific source. We're open to exploring all solutions. We know that there are specific challenges and trade-offs of funding inside or outside of 98.
And when you say make it easier for school districts to kind of take on local debt, does that mean lowering the threshold from 55 down to 50%, something like that?
No, currently it's set at 55%, and bonds are passing over 80% of the time. The proposal specifies adjusting the total bonded indebtedness caps and the tax rate levy caps.
Mm-hmm. Would that be? Do you think? Is there ever any conversation about lowering it down to just a majority vote for local bonds?
Not at this point. With approximately 80%.
I understand 80%, but you have to remember, first of all, that obviously 20% are not passing, and people are only putting them on the ballot if they think they can win, and maybe they could be asking for more money if it's just a 50%.
Again, Juan Morales with the Department of Finance. At this point, we didn't include that obviously in the governor's budget because we think that there's been a fairly successful passage rate. We're looking at other tools like Mr. Kisa mentioned in terms of increasing the tax rate levies and the bond indebtedness caps, but not lowering the voter threshold.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And some of the recent concerns about some of the gamesmanship that was going on with regards to school bonds in certain districts doesn't leave you concerned about raising those caps?
In terms of the capital appreciation bonds?
Exactly.
No, that's not included in the governor's proposal. Again, we're going to leave it up to the locals to select the local financing mechanism. We believe that just with these tools alone will help them gain additional tools to be able to pass more bonds with greater amounts for their school facility needs, but we're not tackling any specific type of bonds that they could issue at this point.
Okay. All right. All very interesting stuff. I really appreciate everyone's testimony. And with that, we can move on to the next panel. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Some of you are going to stay. This next panel has to do with Proposition 39 energy efficiency projects, and it includes higher education. So we've got the community colleges as well as part of this conversation. So, so two of you are still up here, and then we've also got Marcia Smith from the California Energy Commission, and then Dan Troy from the California Community Colleges. And let's start with Ms. Urquiza from the Department of Finance.
The governor's budget proposes to allocate $368 million of energy efficiency project funds available in 2015-16 to K-12 schools and community colleges. From this amount, $320.1 million is proposed to be allocated to K-12 schools and $39.6 million to community colleges. Additionally, $5.3 million to the California Conservation Corps for technical assistance to K-12 school districts, and $3 million to the Workforce Investment Board for job training programs. This funding allocation is consistent with past years and implementing legislation for Prop 39 that specify that 89% of revenues are allocated to K-12 schools and 11% to community colleges.
Okay. All right. Now, let's next hear from Monique Ramos.
Good morning, Monique Ramos from the Department of Education. So just as a reminder, the department is the one that actually allocates the Prop 39 resources. We aren't in the process of approving those plans. That's the Energy Commission will discuss. So for the 13-14 and 14-15 fiscal years, as of February 2015, the total allocation has been $660 million. Planning grants, planning funds paid out have been $153 million. Energy projects paid out have been $70 million. So for the total payments, we have paid out $223.9 million. The total number of districts that received planning funds were 1,645. The total number of actual energy projects that have been funded have been 216. Finally, this is just a reminder that 80, these dollars can be used over multi-years. So 80% of the projects are multi-year proposed funded projects, which is why much of the dollars have not gone out at this point in time.
Okay, so how do think about the timeline for the allocation of the additional, $436 million?
So I would defer to the Energy Commission because they're the ones in the process of approving the plan. So until we receive a approved plan, we can't allocate those dollars. So they would be able to answer that question.
So they haven't. So when you say approved plan, they're approving each and every district plan that comes through you?
They go directly to the Energy Commission. We essentially just cut the check.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, that's a perfect segue.